Right, we are ready for our next chapter. I know we are all eagerly awaiting this one, so let's see what happens next. This chapter is called Con. The next day was a Wednesday. Wednesday at school began with double geography. The most exciting thing that happened on Wednesday was biology with old Mr. Martin, who was liable to fart at unexpected intervals. This Wednesday, Fred woke to a rainforest thunderstorm, and the rain was dripping through to the roof of the den into his ear. Lila and Con were already awake, poring over the map, their heads almost touching. Max was snoring in a rain puddle, mud in his fringe and eyebrows. Bakko's fur was soaked, slicked down against his bones. He looked as furious as it was possible for a sloth to look. Lila laid her thumb on the X on the map. "It's got to be much closer than Manaus," she said as she turned around and saw Fred was awake. "Fred, do you think the raft could get us there?" He moved to look, feeling his muscles creak under his skin. Both girls were shivering. It wasn't cold, but the damp of the day had gotten into their skin. "We'll have to get through all those weeds here," he said. "And there's that sign there." "That thing that looks like a snake?" "Exactly." He looked out towards the river and the filing cabinet grey sky. "But yes, I'd say we could." "But you don't think we should?" asked Con. It was very clearly a question that begged the answer no. "We saw it from the tree. It was miles." "We can't stay here forever," said Fred. He had never wanted anything as much as he wanted to launch the raft down the river to find the X. He needed to know what it was to be an explorer. There was another kind of hunger in his gut that had nothing to do with food. It was terror and possibility, fused together with hope. "You've got to be joking." Con looked from Lila to Fred. "But we have a map," said Lila softly. "We would actually know where we're going this time." "But you don't know what's at the end of it." Con's skin was red and white in patches. "But it's got to be something, or there wouldn't be a map." "But what if the X is supposed to mean never go there because things will come for you in the dark?" "But the other option is to stay here. I thought you'd want to leave," said Fred. "I do want to leave. I hate it here," she spat. "I hate the mosquitoes and the ants and the bites and the endless hunger all the time. But I don't want to follow a map to nowhere. I just want to go home." Max jerked awake and began to whine, tugging at Lila's sleeve. She shook him off. "I want to go home too," said Lila. Her eyebrows were a tight, angry line across her forehead. "But it's no worse for you than anyone else." "Yes, it is." Con's face was contorted beyond recognition. "You don't understand. It's easier for you because you're used to it. You're from here." Lila's eyes widened. "I live in a city." Her voice was thin with shock. "We have a dining room with silver candlesticks. I do not live in the jungle." "But you're not feeling sick all the time." Con's jaw was clenched. "I wake up every morning feeling like I'm going to vomit." She thumped the wet ground and flecks of mud sprang up around her fist. "But so do I. I hate it here so much I can't breathe. Do you think any of us like it?" "But you're not alone," Con burst out. "You've got Max." Exactly, and he cries all the time. And if he dies, it'll be my fault." Max heard, and let out a roar. Sobs shook his whole body. Fred caught his wrist and held it to stop him from running. "Ember, what you doing?" "Sorry." At least you know if you'll die here, there'll be someone who's bothered to care." Con yelled over the noise. "It's not my fault if nobody cares about you," spat Lila. "You don't know." "Stop it!" shouted Max. He ran at the two girls and kicked out both of them, his shoes smacking against their skins. "Stop it! Right now!" Lila's mouth shut with a snap. She turned to her brother and allowed him to climb into her arms. She rubbed his neck, her eyes utterly exhausted. "Don't cry, it just makes it worse." A tear was running down Con's cheek. Fred pulled a leaf from the wall of the shelter and handed it to her. She mopped her face with it. It didn't do much good. "I'm just so tired," she said, "and I'm so hungry and I ache." Lila looked down at her hands. "I didn't mean it, what I just said." There was a silence. The rain thumped against the leaves over their head. I have nightmares about my mamma, said Lila. I dream that she's looking for me and I'm caught in a tree and I can't shout and I can't make her look up and see me. She hesitated. Do you dream about your parents? Fred dreamt of nothing else. His father just out of earshot, just out of reach, while he struggled in the dark to touch him with his fingertips. He half nodded, carefully non-committal. Con's mouth shaped a word, then fell still. It's not like that for me, she said at last. I live with my great-aunt. What happened to your parents? Asked Lila. They're dead. Con's mouth hardened again and she set her jaw as if daring them to sympathise. My mother died when I was 3 and my father was killed in the war, and then a family fostered me. But you just said... They had a baby of their own and they threw me out, so I was sent to live with my great-aunt. Con gave a carefully nonchalant shrug. She didn't really want me, but there were no other options. They kicked you out. They said I bullied the baby, but I didn't. But once it was crying and it wouldn't stop, and I gave it a tiny slap. Oh, Lila said. Her face was stricken. And I don't know, she paused, swallowed, bit off a slither of her thumbnail and then went on. They said I shouted things at the baby. It was only once, truly, and it didn't understand, so why would it matter? Fred nodded. My great-aunt, she sends me to spend summers with the nuns. Nuns? Convent school. That's why I'm in Brazil. The year before that I was in India. She said the travel will improve my character. I hated it. Do you want to be improved? Lila seemed to be trying not to sound too sceptical. Con tried to smile. Not really, but she likes girls to be quiet and proper, and she says I'm rude. I don't mean to be, but then when I try and be good, what I think is good, she doesn't notice. So I don't bother. She wiped her nose with her finger and thumb, and I don't think she'll have sent people to look for me. There isn't much money. The convent school paid for my boat fare over here. They have a fund for war orphans. She grimaced, a deep, bitter wince away from her own words. Charity case. So when you said... I lied. Your aunt sounds absolutely awful, said Lila. Really, she does, said Fred. He wondered if he should punch Con on the arm the way the other boys did at school. He decided it might not be a punching occasion. She's just old, really. Con breathed in a deep, shuddering breath, as if she had just expelled something weighty. She scrubbed at her eyes with a handful of red hair. I've never told anyone about my foster family. Please don't tell anyone. Who would we tell? Said Fred, looking at the green wall of jungle around them. Lila unhooked Bacca's claws from around her neck and settled him on Con's shoulder. Here, he might try to eat your ears, but he means it in a nice way. A tear ran down Con's cheek. Bacca licked it away. Fred looked at Con. Fred never hugged anybody. His father didn't believe in hugging. He said it was presumptuous and unhygienic. But Con looked so suddenly bony and defeated. He made a fist and pushed it softly against Con's shoulder, rocking her sideways. Con waited longer than Fred had expected before she tensed up, and with a half laugh shook him off. Okay, she said. Her breath was shaky. Fine, you win. We'll follow the map. Fred felt something fierce and hot ignite in his stomach. If we gather grubs and berries today, he said, we could be ready by tomorrow. Lila looked at Con's tense face. Tomorrow, she said. Con hunched her shoulders and bent her head. It was almost a nod. So we found out a bit more about Con today. Do we think she's that bad after all? Let me know, see what you think. The next chapter is called Smoke. The next day dawned swelteringly hot. All 4 woke slick with sweat, with dragonflies trying to drink from their skin. For breakfast, Con found a banana tree and they made a sack from Max's jumper and filled it until bananas poked out of the neck. They gorged on unripe bananas until Max was sick on his own shoes. After breakfast, the wind began to pick up. It was a very welcome breeze on Fred's face as he prepared the raft, double-checking every knot. It was the same wind that nearly killed them. Fred and Lila were crouched on the raft in the river, testing how it moved under their weight and retying the vines. Con and Max were hunting for berries to add to their provision. Bacca was half in, half out of Lila's pocket, sniffing the breeze. A swirl of air reached them for the jungle, and Bacca let out a mew. A shiver passed down Fred's spine. Does something smell odd to you? Bacca seemed nervous. He began trying to bite Lila's hem into ribbons. Lila stared backwards towards the path of the clearing. Where there should have been shards of green sunlight, there was a swirl of grey. Is that dust? It's smoke, said Fred. It's a fire! For a moment they both stared at the billowing grey, paralysed. Then Lila let out a scream, and the scream shook the whole raft. Max! Max! Where's Max? He was right there, on the bank with Con. The smoke began to flow like water, sweeping out of the trees towards them. Fred's eyes stung. There was a pounding of feet, and Con came sprinting out of the bushes, her hair flying behind her, catching in the trees. She half dived, half fell into the river and swam, splashing frantically towards the raft. I saw it, she cried, hauling herself up on the edge. The clearing's on fire. It's horrible. Her eyes were red and wild. She stared around. Where's Max? I thought he was with you. Lila's face was unrecognisable. What? No, he said he was going to find you. He wanted to play with Bacca. No, this can't be happening. Okay. Max, shouted Fred. Max! I'm here. The voice was tiny and thin and sounded of pure panic. Max had scrambled up a tree. He was sitting whimpering, unable to scream, in the branches overhanging the river. Fred stared up at him, divided between shock and terror. How did you get up there? Said Con. It's so high. Jump in, Max. Jump into the water, called Lila. I can't. Max, I'm ordering you. Her voice was shrill, wire thin. I'm your big sister and you do what I say. Max's voice was a shriek. I can't. He started crying in long wordless wails, balancing above the river. Fred began pulling off his boots, but Lila thrust back at Con and was in the water. Fred had never seen a human swim so fast. She scrambled up the bank, her nails tearing against the mud, and sprinted for the tree. She began climbing, hauling herself up with just her arms where the footholds failed. Max, she called, just stay there. Fred and Con sat on the raft below, Con holding Bacca in both hands, watching, coughing as the smoke thickened around them. Max was crouching like a sloth with his arms and legs wrapped around the branch. Fred squinted up to see Lila crawling across the branch, talking to him, coaxing him, trying to untangle him, her body shaking as she moved. Max had stopped crying and was now rigid-faced and completely silent, which was somehow more frightening than the screaming. The first flames appeared, snaking along the path from the clearing. The heat sent up sparks, catching on Lila's skin and Max's feet. There was a bang, like an erupting paper bag, as below them seed pods exploded in the heat. Jump in, Fred shouted wildly. Just jump in and we'll come and get you. There was only smoke now, smoke and the sound of Lila calling to Max, singing to him, coaxing him desperately. Jump, shrieked Con. Please, now. Then two bodies plummeted down into the river and the water closed over them. They landed in an eddy of water, and the current swept the two of them too fast into the middle of the river where there were rapids. Fred squinted through the smoke. Their heads didn't resurface. Take the pole, he said to Con. He took a deep breath. And if we die, tell my dad. Sorry. He dived headfirst into the brown water and struck out towards the rapids. Fred opened his eyes, but all he could see was churning foam. A body smashed into his, and he grabbed it. It was Max. He tried through his panic to remember what he'd read about saving people from drowning. You had to gently cup their chin. Sorry, Ember's just crying. You had to gently cup their chin in your hand. He remembered that clearly. But how? The current was too fast to make cupping of any kind seem plausible. Fred spun onto his back and hauled Max up to lie on his stomach, trying to keep the boy's head out of the water. He couldn't tell if Max was breathing. With one arm he began to swim backwards, towards the bank. The water was still trying to pull them under. He could only see smoke and spray and the river sweeping over his face with every stroke. "Don't panic," he whispered to himself. This would be a bad moment to panic. A burning branch fell into the water inches away from them. Max gave a cough and spat out a water beetle, hacking weakly as the water washed over them again. Just as Fred was starting to feel that panicking was really the only available option, he saw something in the smoke. A yell that came over the sound of fire and water in his ears. "Fred! Max!" It was Con. "Over here!" he called. "Swim towards me!" she screamed. "I can't! The current!" It was bitterly hard work staying in one place. One of his legs was starting to cramp, and he was terrified that Max's head would go under the water. A shape came out of the smoke. It was the raft. Con was covered in grey ash. She was paddling hard with both hands, roaring their names as she came. She reached Fred just as he hit a swirl in the current. There was a painful cracking in his ear, smacking against the wood, and a scream from Con, a great scrambling and a burning in his muscles. But then Fred was kneeling on the raft, coughing up water, and Max was there, spitting and vomiting up water and leaves and banana. "Where's Lila?" asked Con. Her voice was mild and high. "Where's Lila?" "I couldn't see her." Fred choked out a mouthful of water and crawled to the edge of the raft. He tried to draw in a deep enough breath to dive again, but each gasp for air made him gag. There was a lurch as they tipped sideways. 2 hands appeared, then Lila's face, her chin on the edge of the raft. "Lila!" Fred let out a noise he hadn't known he was capable of, something between a roar and a whoop, and grabbed her wrists, then her shoulders, heaving her to the centre of the raft. She lay panting. She had a cut across the bridge of her nose, and blood ran down over her mouth and chin, but she was alive. Max!" she gasped. "He's here, he's fine!" Con was shouting though her face was close to Lila's. "Just breathe, he's fine, I swear." She pushed with the pole, thrusting the raft to the side of the river where the current slowed steadily, propelling them away from the flames. At last, when the air was clear and the fire a crackling in the distance, she guided the raft into the shallows, where it stilled, swaying on the water. A crowd of blue butterflies alighted on the bank next to them. Max was wearing pondweed on his head like a tiara. Lila cradled him in her arms. He cradled Bacca. Bacca cradled Max's thumb. It was a long time before anyone spoke. "What happens now?" said Lila. "Do we go back?" "I don't know, everything was burnt," said Con. She was still shivering with shock, and although the sun was warm, the hairs on her arms were standing on end. "I saw it." "The den and the bees?" "Everything. The whole clearing." Con wiped the ash from her face. She looked like a panda bear. "It was our fire. We should have left someone to watch it. The embers were too hot." "Sorry, Ember." Fred spoke quietly. "So we follow the map." "Wait, wasn't the map in your pocket?" asked Lila. Ice swamped Fred's gut. "Oh," he said. "Oh no." He reached into his pocket and fished out the leather pouch. The ink on the map had run so badly that it was no more than a blackish smudge. The paper itself was a pulp, and as he passed it to Lila, it tore in two. He swallowed. "Sorry," he whispered. Lila looked as though she might cry. "Don't be," she said. There was an impatient tut behind them, a sort of cough, the sound of scratching. "You're both so defeatist," said Con. She had pulled a flint from her pocket, and as they watched, she tore a strip of bark from the raft and began etching something onto it. "There, that was a squiggle, and that was where the river curved." "Your photogenic memory," said Max. "Photographic," said Con. She kept scratching. "There, what do you think? Does that look right?" Fred studied her map. "It does look almost exactly, not almost exactly, exactly," said Con sharply. "I was just being polite, actually. I know it's right." Fred looked at the bark and then up at Lila, then at Max and at Con. "Whatever it is that's on the map, it's got to be better than what's back there. What do you say?" That same feeling, fear and hope, and something that felt like what his father called sheer bloody-mindedness, began to churn inside his stomach. Con bit her lip. Then without a word she took up the pole again and pushed the raft off the bank, back into the river and into the corridor of dappled green light. "Left at the next fork?" she asked. "Left at the next fork," said Lila. They coasted onwards for that whole day. Some of the tributaries were only 8 feet across, with a cathedral roof of branches above them creating a midnight darkness. Others were so wide and bright it was hard to see the opposite shore. As the sky grew pink, Fred turned and saw on the far bank a huge caiman as big as a Great Dane. It lay in the mud, its eyes at half-mast, staring straight ahead. His heart clenched. "What do we do?" hissed Con. She spoke without moving a single facial muscle. "Nothing," said Lila. Fred held the pole in his hands like a spear, but the caiman didn't move as they floated past. The sun dipped lower on the river ahead of them. The light grew purplish and thin. Fred could no longer see the surface of the water. "We're not safe, are we?" asked Con. "No," said Fred, "but we can pretend we are." Lila tightened her grip on Bacca's paw. "Let's act as if the river's on our side. Let's act as if the jungle wants us to win." The stars began to come out, casting the water deep black under a silver-flecked sky. "Even if rivers don't take sides?" "Even then." There we go. So that was the end of our 2 chapters for today. I hope you enjoyed listening to those, and we're going to find out what is at the X on the spot tomorrow. Tune in then. Bye. Again. So let's do another chapter. This one is called On the River. It was almost completely dark when they found somewhere to moor, a place where the bank didn't rise too steeply from the river and where the trees didn't look too much like an army raged on the bank. Lila steered the raft towards the land and Fred jumped to shore. "I'll check there aren't any caiman marks," he said. "I'll come too," said Con. "No," said Max. He gripped her ankle. "Stay with me." Con flushed and swallowed a smile. She stayed. Fred walked through the patches of trees, his heart beating in his ears, swinging a stick ahead of him through ferns, sniffing for the smell of anything recently killed. But it smelled only of growing things and of resin and of birds. "It's fine," he called. "It's safe." His voice twisted, echoing through the trees to reach the others, and they shouted instructions back to him and to each other and pulled the raft ashore. It didn't occur to anyone not to trust one another now, he thought. They'd become a pack. Or an expedition, he corrected himself. That was what you called a group of explorers. They slept that night on the forest floor, their backs touching. Though the day had been heavy with sun, the night was cloudless and cold, and Fred slept with his knees tucked into his shirt. He found it was unexpectedly reassuring now to feel Max's foot near his nose when he turned into the night. When the nightmares came, it was good to hear the others breathing. They travelled on for another day and another night, the river carrying them at its own pace on its silver back. None of them spoke much. They watched the sides of the banks, waiting, alert, tense. The morning of the 3rd day, they'd barely cast off when it started to rain. Max was staring out at the splashes rebounding on the river when he let out a scream. "Sharks! Lila, sharks!" "Where?" Lila grabbed Max's wrist. "Hold on to me," she said. "Don't move." Fred looked around them. There was only the expanse of the water and the thrum of the gentle rain. "There are no sharks on the Amazon, Max," he said. "You don't have to worry." But even as the words were leaving his mouth, he saw what Max had seen. A fin rising up out of the water. Con screamed. Lila let out a hiss. Fred froze. He said, speaking through rigid jaws, "Max, come away from the side of the raft." Then the fin dipped, disappeared, and out of the water leapt an arc of pinkish-grey body, curving against the rain and the thunder-coloured sun. "A dolphin!" said Lila. Her whole face was transformed. Fred rubbed his eyes and looked again, but he hadn't imagined it. The dolphin was pink. The arc of pink was followed by another, dipping so that the half-curve of his back rose out of the water, and another, then a puff of water from a dolphin's blowhole. They were coming closer. "Should we jump in?" asked Fred. "Would they let us swim with them?" "Don't," said Con. "There might be piranha." The pod of dolphins circled the raft at a distance. There were 5 of them, Fred thought, or possibly 6. One leapt up clean out of the water only 6 feet away. Max clapped and squealed. "Shh," said Lila. "We have to be quiet, Maxie. They're deciding if they trust us." It did seem that this was what the dolphin were doing. There was something speculative in the way they swam closer, doubled back and away, and closer again. Then, without warning, the pod circled and began to swim away, and the rain grew thicker. Fred's heart lurched. He couldn't bear to see them go. He pulled off his shoes, stood up and dived in, striking hard for the disappearing dolphins. As he neared them, the 4 dolphins sped up and ducked deeper into the water, but one turned. Fred trod water. He held out his hand. He tried to stay as still as he could. The dolphin swam up to him, a shape approaching under the surface. He gasped and spat out the water. It was rose-grey and covered in deep scars along its back. Its snout was lined with fierce-looking teeth, but its eyes were steady and soft. Fred tried to steady his breathing. It was the most astonishing thing he'd ever seen. It was like a battered river god. He held out his hand again. "Hello," he whispered. "I'm Fred." The dolphin dipped its nose to Fred's hand. He gasped at the sudden surprising roughness of his skin. It butted his hand, then huffed as if disappointed, and ducked down deep under the surface. Fred watched, expecting its shadows to disappear, but as he turned back to the raft, the dolphin erupted from the water in front of him. It leapt clean over his head, showering him with spray, and dipped down again and disappeared. The others were shouting and beckoning from the raft. They hauled him up, all 3 trying to grab at once. Fred couldn't speak, or he didn't want to. He wanted the memory to be sharp, carbon copied onto his heart. He imagined his father's face when he told him. His heart sang and thrummed his chest. But the others were boiling over with questions and ideas. "It was like they trusted you," said Con. "Or maybe they thought you were going to feed it," said Lila. "Maybe someone was feeding them sardines," said Fred. Later that day, just as Fred's head was beginning to swim with hunger, Lila spotted a fig tree on the shore. Fred climbed and shook the fruit down onto the raft. They tied the sleeves and neck of his cricket jumper and made it into a sack. Max counted as he put them in. 120! 12 he said, triumphant. Behind them, Lila mouthed, 53. "I always hated figs at school," said Con. "I thought they tasted like eating someone's snot, but actually they're the best thing in the world." Max fished a handful of figs out of his sack and pushed them into his pocket. "These ones are mine. I don't like sharing," he said haughtily. Lila fed one of the figs to Bacca, who ate it hungrily, and half an hour later pooed lavishly all over her lap. She laughed and washed her skirt at the edge of the river. "Sloths only go to the bathroom about once a week, so it's done for at least a few days." Bacca looked thin and even more wide-eyed than usual. "They poo half their body weight each time," she said. "That sounds stressful," said Con. The surface of the raft was constantly being washed over with river water, so Lila draped her clean skirt over her shoulders to dry, travelling down the river like a floating scarecrow. Fred's shoes and shorts were sodden wet, but his shirt remained bone dry. The sun was hotter than 2 days put together. Con's cheeks and foreheads grew bright pink with sunburn. Lila made her a cold compress out of weeds and plaited leaves, which leaked green water down over her eyebrows, but eased some of the burning. That night, as they lay on a bed of fallen leaves, Bacca moved across Lila's shoulder, sniffed at her neck, and climbed up Fred's calves. Sloths were nocturnal, and Bacca seemed unusually sprightly by sloth standards. He fastened his arms and legs around Fred's knee and began to chew at his shorts. Fred lay still, trying not to move his leg as he looked up at the stars. They broke out in spirals and galloping animals and clustered like hordes of white butterflies ranging across the night. Lila was watching too. "Fred," she whispered, "are you awake?" "Yes," he whispered back. "The moon's so close." She sounded half asleep. "You could wear it as a hat." Fred nodded in the darkness but didn't speak. "At home," she whispered, "you only ever get small squares of sky, however much you can fit between buildings and church spires." "Yes," whispered Fred. "I'd never seen anything like this." Lila's voice grew even quieter. "Fred, are we going to be okay?" He kept staring at the sky. "I don't know." Con stirred and turned to look at them. "Are you scared?" she whispered. "Yes," said Fred. He had never been so frightened in his life, but they were alive. He held that thought in his hand, tight against his skin. "Me too," Lila said. "Don't tell Max." "Me too," whispered Con. She gave a grunt of disgust. "But that's obvious. I can't work out how to hide it like you do." They lay, breathing close to one another. "When this is over," said Lila, "let's all swear to meet somewhere." "Where?" asked Con. "What's the most famous place to eat in London?" "The Ritz," said Fred. "Then we'll meet there," said Lila, "and we'll have one of every single kind of cake, and it'll be like a dream." "And hot chocolate," murmured Max. He sounded 3/4 asleep. "Max," said Lila, twisting to touch his forehead, "go back to sleep." Fred stole a look at the other three. Con had closed her eyes. Her brow was furrowed, but her lips had a half smile at the tips. On the fourth day, the river began to change. The trees arched densely overhead and the water was choked with weeds. It no longer smelt fresh. Fish flitted through the reeds. "Are they piranhas?" said Con. Piranha." Lila peered down over the edge of the raft and nodded, her jaws set. She stroked Backer, hanging around her neck, and buried her chin into his fur. Her breath, as she exhaled, was shaky. It was mid-morning, but it grew dark as the branches thickened above them. "Is it me, or does the river suddenly feel less on our side?" asked Con. "Not just you," said Fred shortly. His upper lip and forehead were dripping with sweat. The sweat wasn't only from the work of poling, but he had Con's bark map in his pocket, and the thought of it warmed his chest, beating back against the cold doubt in his stomach. The current was in their favour, but travelling through weeds was arm-aching, back-stretching, skin-shedding work. "Watch out!" called Lila. Fred flinched, looking around for something to hit him in the face, then watched in silence as a snake slipped along a branch, spiralling up the trunk of a tree, and disappeared into the green over their heads. Even Max didn't move. "It's almost certainly not deadly," said Fred. He winced. He'd intended it to sound reassuring, but instead his voice landed somewhere between desperate lying and stern aunt on a deathbed. He concentrated on doubling his speed until they were past the weeds, and they sped down a dark green passageway of overhanging trees. "We're close," said Fred. "On the map, this river goes on until it meets a lake. I think it would be 3 or 4 hours, but it's hard to tell. And then there's a black square, and then a short line. That might be a path or a river, but it could just be a squiggle. And then the X." Con reached into the water for a flattish stick as it floated by, and began to paddle. "The sooner we get there, the sooner we'll know the worst." The raft followed the river, Fred's pole splashing it in his impatience to see what was around the next corner. He guided the raft around a floating fallen tree, traversing for another 5 minutes of dark water, and found, without warning, they'd come to the mouth of a small lake. The lake was an exquisite blue, shiny under a cloudless sky, but Fred didn't notice. They all four sat crouched on the raft, looking up, their jaws open and their mouths wide. There was a long silence. Then Lila spoke. "Did I ever mention I'm afraid of heights?" And that is the end of that chapter. There we go. We will see why Lila has said that she's afraid of heights tomorrow. See you then.